This is the Montgomery Bus Boycott by Will Stuart. The Montgomery Bus Boycott was a year-long practice of several protests dating from December 1st, 1955 and ending December 20th, 1956. Many view it as a standalone incident. However, there is much more information about the demonstrations themselves, as well as what surrounded it and what it was able to blend into in the future. So, without further ado, let's get into it. A boycott before the boycott happened when Vernon Johns sat down in the whites-only section of a city bus in Montgomery, Alabama. When he did this, he urged other passengers to join him before the bus driver forcibly removed him. A similar incident occurred on March 2nd, 1955, when a black teenager named Claudette Colvin sat in the whites-only section, where she was forcibly removed as well. 9 months later, a lady named Rosa Parks went up to the bus stop after her shift as a seamstress in a Montgomery, Alabama department store. When she saw the bus stop was crowded, she went into a local drugstore to get an electric heating pad in case she didn't have a place to sit. When she got out of the store, she went and found a less crowded bus and was able to find a seat in the colored section. After a few stops, the white section has become full, and when that section became full, it was routine that blacks give up their seats to whites so that they could have a place to sit. And if they didn't comply, then the bus drivers had legal authority to arrest them and turn them over to the police. With this being said, Rosa Parks refused to comply and was met with being arrested on the spot.
The Negro passengers on the city bus lines of Montgomery have been humiliated, intimidated, and face threats on this bus line. Just the other day, one of the fine citizens of our community, Mrs. Rosa Parks, was arrested because she refused to give up her seat for a white passenger. Mrs. Rosa Parks was arrested and taken down to jail, taken from the bus, just because she refused to give up her seat. At present, we are in the midst of a protest, the Negro citizens of Montgomery, representing some 44% of the population. 90% at least of the regular Negro bus passengers are staying off the buses, and we plan to continue until something is done.
Following the incident, on December 2nd, a school teacher, Jo Ann Robinson, had made 50,000 protest leaflets and hung them around town. 2 days later, E.D. Nixon held a meeting at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where local black leaders formed the Montgomery Improvement Association, also known as the MIA. They negotiated with the bus company and arranged a one-day boycott where they would not use the city bus system, but instead pick themselves up around with others that were willing to volunteer. 70% of the patrons were African American, and the boycott was 90% effective. Due to this success, the MIA set up a carpool permanently for African Americans around the city of Montgomery. 200 people volunteered to pick people up with their cars, and 100 pickup stations were set up around the city. To help fund the operation, the MIA would hold mass gatherings at various black churches around Montgomery where donations were given. The Montgomery bus boycott kick-started the current civil rights movement and naturally selected Martin Luther King Jr. as a leader since he was one of the main heads of the MIA. King instituted the practice of nonviolent protest, and massive protests were demonstrated in places like Birmingham, Alabama, and Memphis, Tennessee. The civil rights movement was established on the basis of the ruling of Brown v. Board of Education, which ended racial segregation in public schooling before it did it in all public spaces. Without Brown, it is hard to tell if the boycott would have been successful at all. The carpool would have been difficult as well, because the city would have won their case and they would have been able to shut it down immediately. Without a carpool or any legal precedent, the legal process would have taken years. Nonetheless, the Montgomery bus boycott was able to run along with other social movements and eventually form one of the biggest and most influential civil rights movements in the history of the United States and of the world itself. The Civil Rights Act of 1957 was signed shortly after the Montgomery bus boycott, removing stringent voting protection clauses. The first three of its kind, which there were two more civil rights acts signed afterward, one in 1960 and the final one in 1964. The civil rights movement was a movement as a whole, with the events like Brown versus Board and the Montgomery bus boycott. They were able to lead to big events in the nation's capital, like the infamous 1963 protests, the March on Washington.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
The Montgomery bus boycott was a very significant event of its own, but it was also able to feed into more events for the fight against racial segregation in America, and an event that was built off of for the future.